She is not learned in a classroom. She is remembered in bones, hands, and breath, passed down not by textbooks, but by sitting quietly beside the women who have walked before us, midwives who bled, wept, and waited, who watched 1,000 women bleed, bloom, fall apart, and begin again. Traditional midwifery lives in Lineage. In the quiet hours of apprenticeship, where you don't deliver a baby, you sit with birth. You watch, you listen, you carry water, you chart in the shadows, you boil herbs, you learn when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. We apprentice with birth, and she can be a harsh teacher. She will humble you, she will undo your ego, she will test your limits at 3 a.m. after 26 hours awake. She will break your heart open with the weight of it all, and then stitch it back together with holy awe. Midwifery is not just a skill set, it's a way of being. And to carry it with integrity, we must keep the chain unbroken and pair it with humility in all aspects. Apprentice to midwife, midwife to apprentice, woman to woman. To all those quietly learning in the back room, to all those carrying stories inside their palms, thank you. You are the future of birth. You are the weavers. Our conversation today is about apprenticeship, where it was, where it is currently. What are some thoughts?
I'll start.
Weavers.
I'll start. As someone who really didn't have an apprenticeship in midwifery, because all of the preceptors were gone, right? I understand what it looks like when a cycle ends and there are no elders to learn from, and it's a huge problem. So I had to find my own way, right? So when there aren't any preceptors, then you apprentice. It's very clear that you apprentice with birth and that you are in servitude to those families who have given you the privilege of being with them in that time. And I think because it was very much about curiosity and learning what we could learn and not about who was in charge, because clearly the families were in charge. We were able to be with it. We were able to sit at the feet of those women who were giving birth rather than the elders. And they taught us because we had to pay attention. The other elders we had were the books, of course, that rather than Google a question and get an answer, we could sit at the feet of our elders who wrote the books and, and go on those kinds of journeys. But without a preceptor in person, it was a much more difficult journey because we had to learn from our own mistakes and rather than learn from the pearls that could have been given to us by people who had made those mistakes before we came along and could have taught us a different way of thinking.
You then went on to learn from old school docs.
Yes.
And
yes, I apprenticed with them in many ways, that we call it residency in the institutionalized education, but my personal experience was very much an apprenticeship with those old time docs who could tell you things like when you've seen 1,000 normals, right? Like then you won't miss abnormal. Quit looking for abnormal. You learn normal first. And I can quote many different lines of when you've seen 1,000 normal eardrums, then you won't miss the ear infection, when you see it, to put it in family practice terms. So yeah, those were the elders that could teach me from their mistakes so that I could make different ones.
It was skill-based. It was community-based.
It was skill-based, and it was very much, for me, because I had the advantage of working with community-based physicians. So we worked all the health departments and we worked, we were in the community. And actually old Hess, one of my mentors, I quote, used to tell us all the time that we needed to be part of the community, right? Not to stay home and not go shopping, not to stay home and avoid, events, but to actually be out there in the community because we were community members. So the old time family practice docs understood that type of advantage you have when you're a member of the community because you're inside and you understand things differently, and you're
Mhm.
trusted differently.
Rowan, do you want to tell us about what you're seeing in today's apprenticeship model?
That's tough. Well, I think one of the terms that I've learned from Sarita is the normification of
Hmm.
midwifery. And I'm not saying it's good, bad, it's what it is. And so there's a hyper focus on getting the numbers, getting the sign-offs in a very specific timeline,
Hmm.
right? Like there's a timeline or you lose those bursts. So you've got to get more bursts, right? Getting the numbers. I've heard that term so much. And
Yeah.
I feel so blessed that I was not about numbers. I didn't care about sign-offs. I worked in a what would be considered by today's standard a very slow practice because it was about building relationships. If when I tell people in my apprentice, that are out there working currently within that system, that how many appointments we did and how many postpartum appointments we did, and that as the lead apprentice in my preceptor's practice, I was at every single one of them,
Hmm.
from the interview to tying the story together,
Yep.
which is how we closed up our practice. Our time with the family was the story over dinner. We started with tea and ended with food. And
Mm.
because we were community members, like Sarita was just talking about, we were in relationship. And so I feel like the normification of midwifery has come with pressure
Hmm.
to get everything in, to make sure you've done this many vaginal exams and to make sure you've seen this many burrs and you've done this many whatevers. And um, I
Was
don't,
it with you guys that you were telling me about students fighting over twins numbers? Can you count number one? I'll count number two. Was that you?
yeah, I know, I
Yeah,
know.
yeah, that was Liz. Yeah, whenever
Oh,
you talked
okay.
with Liz, right? Because we had that experience over, yeah, competing over who could claim what to as they were finishing their paperwork. And I'll have to say that I was at some of the task force meetings that created the PEP, and my argument was that we needed less numbers and more continuity of care because as
Mm.
someone that learned it from apprenticing with birth, I understood how important it was to understand it as a process, and that, you know, you could see 50 babies come out of 50 vaginas, but it didn't really teach you anything about midwifery. It taught you, something in a fragmented way that wasn't connected with the prenatal care or the postpartum care or the last pregnancy or the family history, right? So what I saw is what I've seen is exactly what many of us that attended those meetings were worried about, which was that we would lose the apprenticeship model in the way that understood it not as a goal, right? It wasn't to do this many burrs. It wasn't a goal oriented process. It was a more of a, I'm going to say, a value driven process
Mm.
or a curiosity driven process where you learned by being present and not because you were trying to make sure that you got the numbers right. So it was a completely different, I must have held my thumb up. It was a completely different uh, style of learning that was, I think, more optimal for an independent practitioner
Mhm.
because it was up to you. It was your self motivation rather than expecting someone to feed you the knowledge that turned you into a midwife. It was a process of becoming rather than a process of being fed information.
I remember someone telling me a story, probably was one of you guys, of there was a certification that in order for her to be certified, whatever the role was, she had to see someone through their 6 weeks postpartum. Does that sound familiar?
Well, I think some of the oh, it may have been when I was talking about the old laws in West Virginia,
Yes,
right?
that's what
They
it
had
was.
They had to see 5 births, so they had to
Mhm.
keep a good, clean house, be a good moral character, be able to read and write, and have seen 5 births, including 10 days postpartum,
That's what it was.
right? Because they understood how important that those 10 days of having someone in the home
Mhm.
caring for you
Mhm.
was to future health and future pregnancies.
Yeah.
Right?
I think one of the things I love about the apprenticeship model and the way that, my story is very common is it's like I'm not, when you talk about lineage, I never met Valerie, who my preceptor apprenticed with, but she's in me.
Mhm.
I know all about her. I would probably know her if I heard her speaking, if she were still
Mhm.
alive today. She's not.
Mhm.
I feel like I carry her with me as well. And, I've talked before to y'all, not on here, but about the difference between teachers, mentors, and preceptors, right?
Mhm.
We have lots of teachers, like we may go to their workshop and we take their knowledge and we take notes and we take some of that wisdom and we move on. Those are our teachers.
Mhm.
Mentors are people we walk with.
Mhm.
Or we study their work to the point where we could walk with them. Like I feel like Polly Block is one of my mentors, and I never met her, but Polly Block's book, man, that book was one of my mentors
Mhm.
because I learned how to do stuff without any tools from Polly Block. And
Mhm.
that stuff's amazing. Like her book doesn't get nearly enough coverage in the midwifery world anymore. I think we need to bring it back.
I haven't heard of it.
Oh, she was an old. I mean, I don't even know when that book was printed.
Old.
It's called Polly Block's Birth Book.
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay.
And she was one of the old granny midwives.
Mhm.
And she talks about the old remedies. Like
Mhm.
she probably used language like put her up on the bricks, like old. And I learned so much from her. She's how I learned how to do the checking. It's in her book that I learned
Bundle
first
height.
about, yep, about
Mhm.
checking dilation without putting your fingers inside someone.
Mhm.
She did that. And so some of these books, like Sarita was talking, those became mentors. They became our preceptors.
Mhm.
Now most commonly it's The Fry and The Heart and Hands, and they're great books too. Like I carried the big purple book before it was ever in paperback to Bursum in the trunk of my car. Because I knew I could use that book as a resource.
Mhm.
And then there's, that apprenticeship, preceptor, whatever you want to call it, relationship that I often say is more intimate than your marriage, like in a different way, because
Mhm.
you do and see stuff together. Because it's not about the butterbursts. It's
Yeah.
not about those. It's the ones that make and break you. It's the ones where, as you said in that beautiful post that you created, we watch women bleed. We see them
Mhm.
break. We break.
Mhm. The ones that make your heart skip a beat.
Yeah. When you're holding your breath and you go home and when you get in the shower, you cry.
Mhm.
Like that was my time and place to cry.
Mhm.
In the shower after I get home, I get to have my nervous system,
Yeah.
process. Um, so I think that when we talk about what apprenticeship maybe used to be and what it is now, like I loved the stories hearing Claudia talk about her and Valerie being out on the streets in Palo Alto together at whatever time of day attending births, like together. And what I loved about it and the way that she brought it to us is, you were talking about the hazing. Like it wasn't that then. We
Mhm.
wanted to make more midwives. We didn't want to break them.
Mhm.
We got to make them, not break them.
Right. Works hard enough.
Right. We're going to already shatter into pieces and have to be glued back together 1,000 times over. We don't need that coming from inside the house.
Mhm.
And a way to make this sustainable is to lessen or even take away this hierarchy and have this power within our circle instead of a power over, like we hear from Sarita. And because what I say, and I'm fairly certain I got it from you, Rowan, which maybe you got it from Claudie, of I expect to learn as much from you as you're going to learn from me.
Right.
And I wanted to carry that on. So it's this hierarchy and making sure that this is sustainable financially, because we are asking so much from students, apprentices, assistants. And so I have heard stories. Thankfully, I didn't experience this, but I have heard stories of apprentices paying their preceptors.
Yes, that is very common, actually.
It's
Mhm.
nuts.
I was told by elders, I spoke at a conference, 2015, the um, Trust Birth Conference,
Yeah. Okay.
2015. I was on a panel about this topic that you just brought up about the value of apprentices, because they add so much to the practice, right? They
Mm-hmm.
are an important team member. And that was a Claudie quote. I don't know if she got it from Valerie, but she certainly passed it on to me. And I love learning from everybody in the circle. And I think that's where the matriarchy comes in, is we're all part of the stone soup, right? I love the stone soup analogy of what we bring to our communities. And um, the ego has to leave. The big ego, the capital E. We all have ego. That's our person. But
Mhm.
the big E, like the big, like the power with the little lowercase p is the power we don't want. The power with the big P is where we're all in our power.
Mhm.
Um, um, I think one of the things I loved that I heard from people witnessing Sarita and her team, which was Liz and Hannah, and you've heard their names um, and met Liz here. uh, is that you could walk into the birth room and not know whose role was what.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't know who was the apprentice, who was the CPM, who was the doctor. That it was a well-oiled machine. It was a team.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we didn't care.
Right.
Right. We each had different strengths, and different roles and levels of responsibility according to the state. But according to the families we were serving, we were just a team, right?
Mm-hmm.
And any one of us was willing to do whichever task needed to be done, whether it was, clean up or, whatever it was. The tasks weren't divided into a hierarchy any more than the people were, right? Which is what we were talking about earlier. That's where you can get into the peer advisors and peer support, as seeing those roles as more important, if not, as important, if not more important than the expert, that in the facility, that we have that wisdom and that knowledge within us to be able to support each other
Mm-hmm.
in this process. And people with higher levels of information and education and certain skills have no more validity on the team than anybody else, right? Because the person with the most power, the person in charge, is the person giving birth,
Right.
and that
And
equalizes everyone else.
right. And I remember the very first birth I attended in my apprenticeship. And I had never attended a birth. Outside of that, I had been doula and support, but was usually taking care of toddlers or something in another room. Like I wasn't like birth team. And I remember the interview, and this mom was already like 32 weeks pregnant with twins. She had been planning a free birth because she had had a bunch of babies, and the midwife never made it. And then she found out she was having twins, and she wanted all the midwives of the land. And so she was like, everybody come to my beautiful twin birth. And so here we were, the team. There were five of us. It was a team of five. It was Claudie, who was my preceptor, another midwife in the community who I'd known for years, and Claudie's lead, two main apprentices, and me, who was going to be my first birth. And I already knew the mom from she was a matrona student also, and Claudia looked at her and said, okay, so this would be your midwifery team. These are your midwives. There wasn't we're the midwives and they're the assistants and she's the whatever. It was just these are your midwives.
Mhm.
And that just really landed with me. Like I almost wanted to get up and leave. I was like, I'm not a midwife. What? You know? But yes, like these are the midwives. Like they're all here with you.
Mhm.
There's no
Mhm.
hierarchy here.
Mhm.
And like Sarita said, everybody has their knowledge. And I think that's what we're also seeing with the, not just in the our own lineages and the hazing of, paying your dues, but also in the credentialing, right? The CNMs are over the CPMs and the CPMs are over the traditionals. And there's this um, holding of knowledge that you don't get this knowledge. This is, and it just can't be like that. Like we're all just midwives.
Right.
I don't care what system you have when it comes down to it and you're sitting at the feet of that birthing woman, you're a midwife. And I don't care if you're a doctor, if you're sitting at a home birth at the feet of a birthing woman, you're a midwife. You're doing this. You're doing
Mhm.
this work. And that is the work that you're doing. So I think that our lineage comes from, yes, all of that. Like Wapio is part of my lineage. I sat with her for years, heard her stories. Her stories are part of my cosmology. They're in me.
Right.
Sarita's stories are now part of my cosmology. They're in me. Dr. Hess, old Hess, is one of my midwives now.
He gets around.
He does. There should be a book of old Hess sayings. And so he's part of my lineage now
Yeah.
because I know those stories. And
Mhm.
I think that that's lineages. Sometimes it's blood, sometimes it's in our teaching, sometimes it's through the books, sometimes it's through the stories. I think most of all, what we remember is the story.
Mhm.
And
And
this
the
is the family you
experiences.
choose.
Yes.
You
Mhm.
chose to have each other's lineages. You chose to have Wapio. You chose to, I don't know if you chose Old Hess, but he's there.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I chose him. I just
And I
didn't know what
chose
I was
you.
getting into.
Yeah, yeah. And I chose you guys through sitting in person, through being part of your collective, through being part of your mentorship, because this is the lineage I want for myself and that I want to then pass down.
Mhm.
And we
It
get to be yours.
yeah.
Like your story fascinates me. I mean, I think of like how long you've been in practice, and that takes me to like what age you were when you were truly called to this work. Like you were born for it, right?
Mm,
Like that's somebody who was born to do the work. And I find that fascinating, and the way that, watching and learning from you in the way that you care from families. Like it is two ways. And you
mhm.
mentioned the value system behind it. And I know we've talked about that on previous recordings of, yeah, I was so blessed to be paid. And I hear of these women paying for their, oh, that was the story I was telling. Yeah, I was at this conference and I'm on this panel and I'm talking about how I was paid and I chose to carry that tradition into my own practice because we don't live in the same society that we did when we were doing this all for barter. I wish we did, but we
Yeah.
don't. I got to pay I got to pay the electric bill real money.
They don't want your sourdough bread?
They do not, or eggs or whatever else I have. Um, and an elder midwife who was sitting in the back of the room actually coughed and out loud said, like, that's bull, they pay me.
Wow.
And I was like, I would never be able to do this work then.
Yeah, right.
That would make it inaccessible and not scalable. And we
Mhm.
have to make it accessible, affordable, and scalable to make more midwives.
'Cause it's a community thing.
Yeah.
So we can, and thankfully, I don't know her name or else I'd call her out by name, but she's very clearly not in the same paradigm of what we're doing. She is in this industrial complex of birth, and we are not.
Right. Yeah, it's a choice you make. There's a
Mhm.
great novel that I read some time ago, The Birth House by
Mm,
Amy McKay. And it's Nova Scotia, I think, is the setting, but it's a midwife who has an apprentice, and basically the apprentice lives with her.
mm,
So you know, I don't know what their payment system was, but the apprentice certainly didn't have any cost of living, right? Because they lived and worked with the preceptor, kind of like Liz did with Cynthia. You know, she worked Cynthia's farm
Mhm.
with her, and you know, she lived there. I don't know all of their arrangements, but that's a whole different setup where, you know, they live together. The other thing I've seen is that in those instances, and you know, I'm just gonna say it straight up, midwifery is hard work, and it requires some level of emotional stability to be able to do it. And you know, we don't, I'm not saying that once you're a midwife you're always emotionally stable, right? Like we go in and out. There might be times when you need to back off.
Mhm.
I've seen often problems created by the fact that maybe there's a student, and I've had this experience, that really at that time in their life didn't have that emotional stability, but yet could still access the numbers, pay somebody to help them get the experience and become a midwife, a credentialed midwife. And that's really not sustainable. Part
Mhm.
of the long process of apprenticeship was creating that balance within yourself to be able to do this work in a way that isn't ego driven, that isn't ideology driven, that really is just of service. So, you know, we've lost our own internal guidance system in helping decide who the natural helpers are, who the people are that have that internal stability to do this work long term.
You can't learn from a textbook how to
Mm,
hold peace within yourself in the corner while
right,
so many things are unfolding.
right.
You can learn some of the normal. There are normals that are not in textbooks, and I think that's a precious mystery. But you can't learn how to hold your energy and how to hold your presence until it's
Mm,
been exampled to you.
right, right. How to tell the truth even when it hurts,
Mhm.
right? Like those are things that you learn by experience and by role modeling and by, you know, good parenting. And you can think of a good preceptor as a good parent. Hannah used to call Liz and I mom and dad, you know, as an example, and or her midwife moms. And there's things that you learn in about relationship that you can't learn from a book, you know, and you learn about yourself.
Right.
Mhm.
I think it's also equally important to know when you do need to be held. Like,
Mhm.
we're all going to have a loss in our practice.
Mhm.
It's inevitable. Babies don't all, they're not all built to live.
Right, right.
And to be able to know that your community is going to hold you in that, and sometimes that's going to be your apprentices.
Mhm.
I did it for Claudie. I had an assistant step in and do it for me because I want, if I'm bringing something into the room, as a apprentice, as a preceptor, as part of the team, as just being there that doesn't need to be there. I want someone to love me and the family enough to say, you need to go outside and ground.
Right,
Mm.
You
right,
need to go outside and take 3 breaths and sit on the ground.
right.
Or
Somebody to help keep us stable.
right.
Mm.
Because that's how we have a healthy community,
Right,
is to not push. We don't always have to push through. Sometimes we need to sit.
right.
And the way we do that is that we have our sisters, we have other people to do that. And oftentimes that happens within your own team.
Mhm.
I was reading a book. I think it's from Raven Lang's birth book. Not
Mhm.
sure, but that's the one I think I was in at the time. And there was a story being told of a primary midwife handling, it was probably a shoulder dystocia. And the midwife, the supervising midwife, if we want to use these terms, she came beside the primary and she just gently, steadily placed her hand on her lower back to
Mhm.
provide that breath, to provide you can do this. You're in a
Mhm.
safe space. You have help if you need it. And there didn't have to be words, but
Right.
there was this unspoken, energetic connection between the two of them. And I look forward to the day where I can pass that on and I can do that for somebody.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes. It's just knowing you're not alone.
Mhm.
That's one of my favorite pictures of Hannah and I. At a birth, we used to, because it was usually Hannah and myself that was crawling around down on the floor, you know how it goes. Or as my son said after his daughter was born, you look like you were checking the oil down there, you know. But anyway, so Liz must, and then Liz would hand us things. And so she must have taken this picture, and it's exactly my hands on, because Hannah, you know, caught the babies. I already knew how to do that. So I was past that. So it was just a picture of my hand on her lower back, supporting her as she was leaning in to do whatever it was she was doing. And I was like, yeah, that was one of my favorite pictures because it expressed exactly what I was trying to do, which was to, you know, be that support that could hold her up so that she could do that work.
Mhm.
And to me, that's what a preceptor does.
Mhm.
We're seeing so much of this sister to sister. What is this? Is this vertical? No, this is horizontal. This this horizontal tearing down. And that's
Right.
The
so
horizontal violence.
yeah, it's so opposite of what Serena you were doing with that gentle hand and what we're trying to create here of that's just what's been lost.
Mhm.
Right. It's part of that round peg in the square hole problem,
Yeah.
right? Like, because you're not gonna, you'll see some things like that in institutional practice, but it's rare and it's
Mhm.
not obvious. Because there is that more competitiveness and everybody needing to always, you know, be perfect, so to speak, have that illusion of perfection.
Mhm.
And that's part of what we have to let go of too. There is no such thing as perfection. It's all an illusion. And when we chase it, you be the perfect midwife with a capital T, capital M, right? Like that, I've seen that cause a whole lot of that horizontal violence, of that jockeying for position on who has the most favor, you know, who has the best whatever title or, you know, reputation or whatever it is. And we've got to stop doing that, because we are our own worst enemy in that way.
Rowan, can you tell us about backstitching?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about backstitching. It's my favorite process in everything
Mhm.
that we do, I think. Um, it's really I think the official term for it, like in the system, is
Debriefing.
debriefing. That's it. See,
Ah.
I can never remember that. Backstitching, I can always remember. So when you sew, to backstitch is to strengthen.
Mhm.
Right? It solidifies it and really holds it together and strengthens it. So you stitch forward and then you back stitch. And the way that we place this language on this is after the fact. It might be directly after, depending on the timing and how long a birth takes. Um, it might be after a rest and a meal, or it could be directly after if we, are out for Denny's at whatever time o'clock in the morning or whatever. And but that's the time to weave the story together in the team, not with the family, but like the team.
Mhm.
And what I loved about that process when I was an apprentice is that was the time Claudia was like, bring me all your questions.
Mhm.
Like if you didn't understand why I did something, why I said something, or you think it should have been different, she allowed that, like that was something she embraced and
Mhm.
welcomed. Like, what would you have done then? Especially as you grew in your knowledge and skill set. Was, well, how would you have done it differently? And how do you think that would have changed things? So that was when we would do all of that work of solidifying it together. What made you think to do that thing? Why did you ask her to get in that position? Like whatever those questions were, helped us as the students understand the whole picture sometimes,
Mhm.
right? It would be like, oh, you were anticipating an asynclitic this, so you asked her to go ahead and, you know, proactively
Yeah.
work that out. You saw something. Tell me what you saw. How did you know?
What questions were you asking within yourself? Because
Right.
being a good question asker, that can
Yeah.
get you so far.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. And that was the time and place that we got to during that session, that, backstitching session, was the time and place for us to be able to question everything
Huge.
and really understand everything that was going on in the room. And no question was not welcome. Every question was welcome. And we did that too with all of our things. And I think it was a chance for me when I had assistants. I never called myself a preceptor or called them apprentices. I had assistants. We apprentice with birth. That is my motto. We're all learning here together. But I remember a specific conversation after a mono-die twin birth that we had with gastroschisis. Baby B had gastroschisis, and in between baby A and baby B, the placenta the placenta abrupted. So it became this other thing, also thrown into mono-die twins with gastroschisis, with a very small twin team. There were only 3 of us, and only 2 had myself and my lead apprentice were the only ones who had ever witnessed twin birth. And I remember the first backstitch. We backstitched that particular birth a lot because there were so many factors, right? And things would come up, more questions would come, and it'd be like, can we talk about this again? And so, of course, the answer is always yes. But I remember directly after, when we were all literally lying flat on our backs on Tara's living room floor. And I remember apologizing to my team, going, I'm really sorry if I raised my voice. I'm sorry, like, I hope that was okay. I'm sorry that I yelled. And they were like, we could barely hear you.
Mhm.
We had to lean into, and I'm like, that's when I remember, I was like, oh, right. In my head, I felt like I was screaming. They were like, you even said please and thank you. Like,
Mhm.
please call 911. Thank you for doing that. Da, da, da. And I was like, I don't remember any of it, right?
Yeah.
And then their questions for me, it was, how did you know how to do that? How did you know that? How did you know that? I didn't fully have answers, because sometimes we don't. And that's when I would just say the grandmothers whispered in my ears.
Yeah.
That's where that innate lineage comes in. Maybe it was Valerie that was Claudia's person. Maybe it was some wise grandmother. Maybe it was the mom's great grandmother. Like, I don't know, but they guided. And that's where the intuition is. Like, that's really what that is. That's your intuition.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Anyway,
And that takes a bit to develop enough to trust, right? To get your logic out of the way.
right.
Right.
Especially if you've come in from the brainwashing side
Right.
of
Right.
not trusting birth, of not knowing physiology.
Right. Of not trusting yourself, right?
Mhm.
Like, that's really where it starts, is learning to trust your own guidance, your own knowing before you
But
can trust anybody else's.
I think backstitching is important. We did it with everything. I didn't learn backstitching in the birth world. I learned that in another modality of that I've been a student of for a very long time, called the color code, that Dr. Taylor Hartman, who's a psychiatrist, developed. And one of the mentors in that, it wasn't even him, it was one of my teachers in that, called going back and saying, what did you learn? There are specific questions in her teaching of backstitching, which is, what did you hear? What did you learn? What's different now? And what would you have done differently?
Mm. That's good.
So we can talk about that more in some other time. But it actually comes from somewhere else that I then brought in to this, because I feel like I just like the term
Perfect.
backstitching more than I do debriefing.
It's just so granny. I love it.
It's so granny.
Any last thoughts about lineage apprenticeship? If not, we can call it here.
Yeah, I think we've summed it up pretty well, that it's relationship, that it's a process, that there's lots of different ways to do it, and that we need to do it well.
Yeah. And I think that uh, the traditional models of apprenticeship that came before the normification need to have a resurgence, if you will.
Mhm.
Because what I hear a lot out there in the streets of social media is midwives who want to be traditional midwives, who want to be the birth keeper and the true keeper of the sacred of sitting at birth, can't find one because they're not
Right,
looking for the credentialing.
right.
And so there's a different level of hierarchy there of I only want students who are going for the thing. Instead of so then it becomes not necessarily about making more midwives and making more access to the community to more midwives, a bigger pool of midwifery. It becomes a flavor of midwifery.
Mhm.
And you can go after the numbers. You can be a part of NARM
Yeah,
and PEP and
absolutely.
still have the relationship.
I had every sign off. I could have
Right, yeah.
sat in arm.
Right,
Yeah.
Hannah did. Hannah also did probably 150 more burrs than she needed to
Okay.
get those numbers, right? Like the numbers
Mm.
the numbers were never the goal with her. They were the afterthought.
Right, because 50 is not that many.
No.
But my preceptor was part of the what was it called? The elder midwife? What was it? The
Yes.
senior midwife.
The
Something.
elder legacy, yeah, I don't know.
Something.
Experienced midwife kept
That
there.
was it.
That's how I got mine too. Yeah.
Yeah. So she was not a CPM herself, because she was a midwife long before that happened. So they considered her an elder, so she was able to sign without actually being a CPM. Sarita was of the same
Mhm.
thing. So she was like, I can sign, you're here in case you decide. That was
Mhm.
kind of our thing. I didn't have a goal. I didn't know if I was going to sit the exam or not. I had no idea when I was doing my apprenticeship if I was going to make that choice.
Right.
Um, so we did the signs and just in case, you know.
Yeah. I always recommended people use the PEP as a blueprint. I mean, a
Yeah.
lot went into that.
I
A
loved the
lot.
little booklet. I loved the booklet and
Use
being like,
it.
yeah. But then we would have arguments sometimes. This is
Mhm.
the beauty of a really healthy apprenticeship, I think,
Mhm.
is that you can say no.
Mhm.
And I remember a very specific situation where apparently my preceptor was like, oh, she hasn't done a vaginal exam during da 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 da, and that's a sign off that needs to be done. And so we were standing outside at the end of these people's driveway so they couldn't hear us in the pouring rain with me going, I am not putting my hands inside that woman. And her being like, but you need to, and I'm like, but she doesn't want that.
Mhm.
And she's not asking for that. And as a matter of fact, I think it's causing a problem when you do
Mm.
it. So I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to be part of her problem. And so here was we were both coming at it from love. Like she wanted that information. That was the model that she was trained in. Like she was
Mhm.
Valerie, my grandmother midwife, was a CNM.
Mm.
And so you did vaginal exams.
Mhm.
That's how you knew what things were progressing. But it was also at that same birth that I learned the smell of 5 centimeters because Claudie pointed to her nose.
Mhm.
And I knew that meant for me to note the smell in the room. And so later, when we backstitched, she said, what did you smell when I pointed to my nose? I
Mm.
said, oranges. And she said, oh, well, that's what 5 centimeters smells like to you. It will smell different to everyone.
That's amazing.
So I was like, oh, so now I know what 5 centimeters smells like with open waters, not in the tub, right? Like there's parameters.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
there are those subtle things in apprenticeship too, of like, oh, if she ever pointed to her nose or to her ears, I knew I was to take note of the smell or the sound in that very moment because she was going to ask me in our backstitch
Mhm.
about that moment.
Mhm.
And I had to be
There's something about um this, which we really shouldn't be considered continuity of care, to be with someone for the majority of their labor process. But there are also students out there that are seeking numbers, and in a birthing center is what I have in my mind, a story of a birthing center where a student would pop in as the head emerged,
uh-huh.
Mhm.
watch the baby, and pop out.
Yep.
Mhm.
No pre-labor, no labor, no postpartum, and she could count that for her whatever number of births that she saw.
Yep. You could just
Right.
step into the room from crown to birth and step right back out. Go
Crazy.
sign off. Yeah. And we
Which
had not
doesn't
been
take
in the room
much.
with that woman that whole time. She just happened to call us in for some. It was not her first time, and she birthed fast, and she was in another state. So she called us when her water broke
Nice.
and contractions happened. So we just happened to be in the house. But yeah, we didn't just sit in the room the whole time. But that was a moment that we were with her, and she was a
Mhm.
little nose tap, and
Mhm.
I learned for me, and she
Mhm.
wouldn't tell me what it smelled like to her because
Mm.
she didn't want to influence my smell and my
Uh-huh.
intuition with it. She was like, no, it'll smell different. And I was like, what does it smell like to you? And she was like, that doesn't matter.
That's fine.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't want to influence. So
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, there's so many things that we learn when we have these deep relationships. Like,
Mhm.
Mhm.
This was great. Thank you
Yeah,
guys so
embodied
much.
knowledge.
Yeah, embodied knowledge. This is good.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. Catch y'all next time.
Okay, thanks.